Okay. There we go. Hello, welcome to Jason the Old Millennial. My name is Jason. I'm here with my good friend Nick and multiple collaborator on the channel and his channel. So we're here for another live stream talking about our top 10 favorite albums of 1961. We did one for 1960 last month or so.
Yeah.
I remember when it was. It was a little while ago, I guess.
Or my 1 month break.
Yeah, that's right. Because we had a month break in between. So getting back to that. Me and Nick were talking about baseball behind the scenes. I got my Royals cap on, and he's got his Mets shirt on. So, I'm more excited about football starting tomorrow. The Chiefs are playing tomorrow, so football season. But yeah, still in baseball at the time. In fact, yeah, I guess October is the big month for like baseball, isn't it?
It's getting towards the end of the season, going to the playoff.
Getting towards the end of the baseball season, football season about to start. So pretty exciting times for sports. But anyways, besides that, we're talking 1961. And so I guess first thing to ask is like, what were your thoughts on this year, 1961, or what was your overall thoughts, I guess, on the whole year, I guess,
I mean, I made it clear that I wasn't the biggest fan of 1960 as a year. I'm like, there's some really good albums. I mean, that Etta James album was a big discovery for me, but besides that, there wasn't really many great albums that year. I mean, there were albums I was able to put on a list, but if we were to I know we're planning on doing the top albums of the 60s, so
yeah,
none of those albums are making that.
None of those, are making it.
And I'm going to be brutally honest, this year, not much better. It's better slightly. I do have 3 10 out of 10 albums this year, unlike probably like 1 or 2 from last year. The albums are good, but again, none of these albums are making my best of 60s albums lists. And it's not necessarily their fault. We're still in singles year where they're paying attention more to the singles than the albums, which, the albums weren't really much of a priority back in the days, but I'm definitely glad we're able to do at least cover these years to show how music would end up progressing into something that's great. So that's why I'm glad we started in the early 60s, so that we get great years like 65, 66, 67, But that's
you get a real you get an idea of what was going on before and how the 60s kind of evolved, I guess, in a way musically. And that's what I like about going back and listening to these albums and going, wow, these are definitely way different than what we're going to get in a couple of years.
It's interesting to see pre-Beatlemania album.
Pre-British invasion is so vastly different.
A lot more jazz, a lot more soul. It's weird, actually.
Yeah, exactly. I got someone watching, the Thin White Duke, who's mentioned 1976 is a better year, which I was trying to think what came out in 1976. I can't remember on top of my mind. That's
Boston debut.
Boston. He mentioned Station to Station, so Dave Bowie, I guess, was in full swing.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think, because that's after Rumors and Hotel California, I think, around 75, and then
Date the Races by Queen was made.
Okay, great album. Yeah, you got Queen. Yeah, Queen's doing some really great stuff around this time. Yeah. I'm sure there's some great albums once I get to that year.
Trigger the Tail by Genesis.
Yeah, good album. Yeah. Shows how big of a game changer the Beatles were. Oh, yeah, when we get to 64 and 65, like the British Invasion are just in full swing in 65, basically. And
not only that, but we got what we nicknamed the American Revolution with like the Byrds and Springfield taking charge as well.
We get some great American bands. Yeah, it's like the British Invasion comes in and the American bands also get in full swing. I mean, Bob Dylan will get in full swing as well. at that time. Yeah, because we don't even have any Bob Dylan yet. It's 61.
Yeah,
The Beach Boys are just kind of starting to form at this time. They just come out with their first single, actually, I think this year is what I
yeah,
wrote down.
album though.
But no album, yeah. So we don't even have Beach Boys yet, no Bob Dylan yet. Yeah, it's pretty a bunch of big names they're just around the corner. Like the Rolling Stones are starting to form. I think the Beatles are formed. They're starting to, they haven't got their big deal with EMI yet, but they're about ready to. They're almost there. It's like we're almost there to a lot of really great bands that I'm familiar with and all that. Yeah. Um, Hey, Mike.
Hello,
Thank you.
Mike.
Yeah, I think next year Bob Dylan's going to come out. Yeah, I think you're right.
But yeah, all I gotta say is these early '60s videos that me and Jason are doing is just to prove how much of an impact the Beatles made in music. Because
Well,
yeah,
yeah, sorry.
once the Beatles came into play, every artist was like, we got to start making better music to compete with the Beatles. Great.
Yeah, yeah,
I know I've had my nitpicks with the Beatles, but I will say this: without the Beatles, I don't think artists would have strived to do better. That's one thing I'll infinitively give the Beatles towards, is that these artists like the Birds, Mamas and Papas, Beach Boys are like, crud. America's being flooded with the Beatles. Now we got to start making better music. Without the Beatles, where was their, what's the word? They would have had no real strive to do better if the Beatles weren't around. So, and these early '60s albums is proof of that.
yeah. These are huge influences on the Beatles themselves, who then become huge influences on everybody else. So, yeah, it's kind of interesting to see how the Beatles are influenced in other R&B bands, I guess. What do you want to call them? R&B blues bands or whatever.
Yeah, like jazz. There's so much non rock and roll in these early albums.
Yeah, there's like no. That's a funny thing. When I go through this year, I just noticed like, gosh, there's no bands. Like bands aren't a thing really. It's a solo artist, or girl groups or boy groups, whatever. We have four girl singers or four boy singers singing together. Not quite what I call band, but groups. But there's no rock and roll band at this time. You have rock and roll singers like Elvis or some, that still do music, and Chuck Berry and some of those. But yeah, it's just so funny to listen to this and just go, gosh, it's just so weird not having really rock music really dominating at this point. Yeah, of course, Scott mentions, yeah, Love Me Do and Please Please Me. Yeah, and 62, that's when they first sign on and they make their first single. But yeah, 63 is when they're going to make their first couple of albums. And yeah, so they're coming around. But yeah, because I felt like to me, the big music was like, I feel like, well, Motown is starting to be the big thing in this year. We're starting to get some Motown groups and singers, that would be, Motown is becoming a big deal at this point. I would say, and I would call it like soul music. Like there's these female singers and maybe male singers, I guess, that you call it blues. There's kind of a bluesy, jazzy, and I call it soul, I guess. I just kind of put it all under, it's like soul music and doo-wop. And you got these doo-wop groups that, kind of all, and Motown's kind of like soul and doo-wop, I think, or mixtures of that kind of stuff. Anyway, so that's kind of the genres I feel like are, to me, that dominate my list. When I say, oh, this is what I like. The albums I'm enjoying are more the Motown stuff, maybe some soul, maybe some doo-wop. That's kind of what I'm getting at on this year. Yeah, not really pop music or rock and roll music really isn't the thing to me. What I would call pop or rock music. Maybe there's some influences there, but yeah, just to give a little couple things that happened this year. I didn't have a lot of written down for this year like I did last time. I had a bunch of stuff written down, so a little bit of going through a little bit of history of this year. Talk about what happened. Like I have down, Motown signs the Supremes on January 15th of this year. Supremes, I don't believe, had an album this year that I heard, so I'm guessing next year they'll probably debut. So Supremes will become a huge thing. They have tons of #1 hits when they come out. So Supremes are coming out. February 12th, the Miracles, they have a song called Shop Around, which is on one of their albums. And it comes Motown's first #1 million, or first time Motown song sold 1 million record singles, whatever. So Shop Around was a huge, huge hit for Motown at this point. I wrote down February 15th, Jackie Wilson is shot by his girlfriend, survives, but is seriously wounded. So I didn't know that happened. You know, girlfriends, they get, crazy sometimes around. If you're a famous celebrity, sometimes you got to watch out. They can go crazy. I wrote down this, I thought was interesting. It said, from what I researched, it said, on October 17th, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards bumped into each other at a railway station, and they had known each other before, but they hadn't been, I guess, around each other, and they bumped into each other, and they started talking about music and how much they loved rock and roll. And so it feels like this is like almost a turning point for them when they kind of start getting together and forming the Rolling Stones. So it feels like this is kind of the origin of the Rolling Stones here. Mick Jagger and Keith Richards getting together. So like I said, Rolling Stones are starting to get together maybe at this point. Something's starting to happen. Like I said, I always have to talk about like what's going on with the Beatles. November 9th, Brian Epstein, he goes to the Cavern Club, sees the Beatles playing, and soon after offers to be their manager, which is a huge turning point for the Beatles, of course, because once they got him as manager, then he started getting started going around trying to get him a record deal. Anyway, so that was a big moment for them. December 8th, the Beach Boys released their first single, Surfin'. That's their first single that comes on their next album. We talked about on, I think, Scott's channel, Surfin' Safari, I believe it is. It's their first album that comes out the next year, and Surfin' is a song on that album, but it's not a huge hit, I don't think, but it's not a bad song. I think it's a decent song, but it definitely shows, what the Beach Boys, are going to be, this great harmony band with catchy, tunes, and it's going to have a beach sound, it's going to have that beach sound to it, surfing and all that. And then I also wrote down the Country Music Association. They create the Country Hall of Fame this year, and they induct Jimmie Rodgers, Fred Rose, and Hank Williams as their first inductees to the Country Music Hall of Fame. So that's happening this year as well. Also like to get to top 10 albums as far as what I could research. These are the top 10 albums like sale-wise. And I was going to ask you, do you have any albums from 1961, Nick?
Yeah, I have a list of 10 albums from 1961.
I own one. I realized when I looked at my list, the #1 album of this year was West Side Story, the soundtrack. The movie came out this year, and so this was the #1 like best-selling album, and I own it. Like I got this this old copy this last year, anyways. So I'm like, oh, I own like the best-selling album. I didn't realize it. 1961. Of course, the movie was a huge, huge hit and won a bunch of Oscars, including Best Picture, for this year. But looking at what sold well, like a lot of, it's interesting. We got Blue Hawaii, which is an Elvis Presley movie soundtrack. We got Johnny Horton's Greatest Hits. We got Merry Christmas to All by Ray Conniff, which I'm not familiar with. My Favorite Things by John Coltrane, which is like blues music. Ebb Tide by Earl Grant, which I'm not familiar with. Then we got Something for Everybody by Elvis Presley. So Elvis is still a big deal at this point, I think. Still selling well. Jump Up Calypso by Harry Belafonte, which I've heard of him. Don't know a lot about him, but I know he's a big deal. Then we got the Breakfast at Tiffany's soundtrack, another soundtrack for a big movie. And then we got Joan Baez Volume 2 also in the top 10. And I can say right now, none of those albums are in my top 10 favorite albums of the year.
Me neither, actually.
None of those made it.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked down like, wow, these are the albums that sold well, and these aren't to me the great albums. So there's a, I don't know if it's just this is what people were buying at the time, and then the albums I have on my list, I think are better albums. Like in retrospect, are reviewed better. I think I would think anyways. So that's interesting. I thought, so right now what I like isn't um, syncing up with what was selling at the time. I mean, we're in top 10 anyways. Also talk about what was nominated for Grammy Album of the Year. Uh, the winner is Judy at Carnegie Hall. Judy Garland did. She was doing live concerts at this time. And she was selling very well. Of course, she's very popular. Of course, made a lot of musicals. Starting with Wizard of Oz in '39, and then all through the '40s and '50s. So she's kind of an older now, but she did a concert at Carnegie Hall that did very, very well. And that ended up winning the Grammy, which is kind of odd. It's like, wow, it's like this old singer singing these old hits. And I've heard the album, and I'm not a big fan. It's too long. It's like a 3 hour. It's like a really long, because it's a concert. So it's like a really long album. It's like a lot of old stuff. I mean, I like, like Over the Rainbow or something like that. But I can't say I listen to Judy Garland ever music-wise. That just tells you the Grammys are kind of like, they're not looking at what's the current hits. They're looking at the past, and you'll see that a lot with the Grammys in the '60s. They seem to give the Grammys to older acts and not to the newer stuff that's popular. Like I said, Breakfast at Tiffany's soundtrack got nominated. West Side Story soundtrack got nominated. So I own an album that got nominated that year and was the big hit seller. I would say I wish West Side Story would have won, because I think it's a better album than Judy at Carnegie Hall, personally. But that just shows you what, like I said, soundtrack albums were really popular, I think, in this early period, and probably will be for the whole '60s. But so that just tells you what kind of time we are in. I don't know if soundtrack albums are sell as well. Maybe they do, and I just don't think about it. But we do get Ray Charles album, Genius plus Soul equals Jazz. And then we get great band with great voices, and the Nat King Cole Story by Nat King Cole, again, kind of an older crooner. So that's the stuff people were liking. And again, none of those 5 albums made it into my top 10. So right now, I'm not syncing up with what the Grammys like and what people are liking, which I think is interesting. It just kind of shows you what kind of music was popular at this time period.
Yeah.
Yeah, Epstein was a huge part of the Beatles story. It's no wonder after he died they started to drift apart. Oh, I think it's a huge reason why they kind of started, drifting apart, like you said, and eventually break up. Because without Epstein, they didn't really have a, kind of a leader that unites everybody. And then, McCartney started trying to be the leader, and that was like not, I think John and George didn't like that, and so it was. There's some rifts in between the band, because it's like, where did they go? Paul was trying to think of like, where do we go next? He keeps thinking, let's make a movie, Magical Mystery Tour, and it failed, bad time, or bombs big time. Let's do, a documentary, and it's trying to, come up with some kind of direction for the band. And I think Epstein would have helped with, plus they fought over the new manager as well. So yeah, I agree. That's a huge part. Yeah, West Side Story. Yeah, huge hit for them. Yeah, Elvis was still going in the early '60s. Yeah, in the mid '60s, he was only making junkie movies, but he's back on top in '68. Yeah, and we're probably going to cover Elvis at some point with Jacob Martin. We were planning on, so we'll get more into Elvis. Because I'd say me and Nick aren't the biggest Elvis fans, but I think appreciate some of his music.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I know he makes a lot of terrible movies. I feel like during this period, I said he's still very popular, I think, at this time. But I feel like, I mean, I suppose once the Beatles become like the number one thing, then Elvis kind of starts fading away a little bit more, because the Beatles just were so huge. It's still the prim and proper '60s, yeah. '66 is where Grammys get with the times. Yeah, exactly. like Frank Sinatra is going to win like three Grammys here in the '60s, while the Beatles are still like the big thing, and they're still giving it to Frank Sinatra. I think Barbra Streisand wins a Grammy this decade. It's like really like when you get all these great bands coming out with classic, I mean, some of the greatest albums of all time, and like you're giving it to Barbra Streisand. And no offense, Frank Sinatra, I know, he's got a lot of fans. I just thinking like Frank Sinatra was, to me, bigger in the '50s. He should have been given. They didn't have Grammys really in the '50s, or he would be getting all of them, pretty much. But anyways,
I like Sinatra, but I don't think he's album of the year.
Yeah, I don't think he's not in the '60s. Anyways, he shouldn't be getting album of the year over some of the the bigger groups. Anyways, but yeah, it's not until like '66, '67 when the Beatles win album of the year for Sgt. Pepper's that the Grammys starting to give it to current music. Up till then, they're given to like really old acts. I feel like Barbra Streisand's not an old act. She's actually a young singer at this time, but she's singing kind of old standards and stuff, I think. Anyways, but yeah. Old Blue Eyes probably has enough awards. Yeah. Oh yeah. One of the most decorated artists we ever had. All right, so that's kind of the history and kind of what's going on in the music scene in '61. Kind of gives us an idea. But then we're going to talk about completely different albums than what I probably just mentioned, which is interesting. So we'll see. We'll have some similar, some different, probably a lot of similar albums in our top 10. There's not a lot to choose from. I'm like you. It was hard getting 10 together, just like 1960, 61. But I think I had my albums at the top I like better than the albums at the top of '60. So I think it improved a bit. A lot because we get, I was going to mention, because we get, like I said, we get the Miracles this year. The Miracles put out 2 albums. So we get the Miracles are debuting this year. The Marvelettes are debuting this year with Please Mr. Postman. Aretha Franklin is debuting this year, pretty much, from what I can tell. Dion, he was with Dion and the Belmonts. Now he's gone solo. So you got Dion kind of debuting his solo career here. I don't know if I missed anybody else, but I mean, we're getting a lot of these great Motown singer groups debuting this year. So to me, those are my favorite artists for these. It's funny, these people are debuting or do pretty well on my list so far. Feels like the old rock and roll people aren't doing that great. Just these newer singers that are doing really good. Anyways, but yeah. So let's get to our top 10 albums of this year. You want to go first with your 10, Nick?
Sure. I feel like my list is gonna be shorter than the video time it took us to describe this year.
Yeah.
Funny. But having that said, my number 10 is gonna be Benny King's debut album, Spanish Harlem. Of course, this has the big hit, Spanish Harlem, easily the best song on the album. You'll hear it from me a lot. Usually I'm not the kind of guy who has the big single as my favorite song on the album, but this is, like I said before, this is the period where the big hits were like the big priority, and like the deep cuts, like, we'll just record it, maybe a take or two. That's it. But yeah, Spanish Harlem, best song on that album. There are some really good songs though. I really like Sway. I think that's a great song. Amor, it's a really good opening track. Come Closer to Me, pretty nice. Love Me, really good song. Besides that, this album, there's like a lot of boring tracks on this album. I don't really care for Souvenir of Mexico that much. There's 2 different versions of it. There's a version that's like the B-side of Spanish Harlem, which it's a lot faster, it's more upbeat, but the version that they use on this album is slow, it's boring. I'm like, why did they do that? Why didn't they just put the single version or the B-side version?
Yeah.
It's beyond me, to be honest. I mean, yeah, but besides the top songs I just said and of course the Big Spanish Harlem. This is just a okay album. I thought it was a good album, but besides making this list, I'll probably never listen to this album again.
I know, that's why I am. Yeah, Benny King, that's right. So this is probably his debut album as well. So he's also coming in. Incredible singer. I love his voice. I love Spanish Harlem. That was a good song. I wasn't a big fan of the album. It was a little boring, like you said, outside the big hit. I know he's going to have some other big hits later in the 60s, so be interested in seeing where he goes from here. But number 10 for me, I have Bobby V's self-titled album, Bobby V. Yeah, this is one where it's like I'm not like a huge fan, but like I kind of like Bobby V's voice overall. I have one like compilation album, Bobby V. He had some good hit songs here. He's again part of this kind of doo-wop kind of solo singer type, young, good-looking solo artists, that are coming around this time period. That was very popular in these early 60s. I have quite a bit of them on my list, in fact. And I had a Bobby V album on my top 10, I think, the 1960 as well. So so he's kind of my go-to person. If I can't come up with an album, I'll probably just put Bobby V on there. Because I go, he has a nice sounding voice. He has a big hit with Rubber Ball. Rubber Ball, really good song. Kind of the big hit on this album. He has One Last Kiss, which is a decent song. It's also the musical. I'm forgetting the name of the musical, but I knew it from a musical, anyways. Also, Mr. Sandman is a cover song. I don't like it as much as I forget the name of the girl group. There's a girl group that has the big hit, Mr. Sandman, which is one of my favorite songs of the 50s. And I like their version probably better, but still, it's not a bad cover from him. So mostly it's Rubber Ball and then a bunch of covers, and they're okay. So I have here at number 10. Again, probably won't. Like I said, I have a compilation album that I'll listen to, but probably won't listen to this individual album all that much. But it makes it into my top 10.
Cool. My number 9 is gonna be Frank Sinatra album. Like I said, Frank Sinatra is gonna make my list for these early.
As I say, I think he makes your, yeah.
But once we start getting into some great music, you won't be hearing from Frank Sinatra.
Yeah.
Maybe he might have an honorable mention, but right now this is the perfect time for Frank Sinatra to be making music because right now creativity is at an all-time low. I mean, whoever is a fan of these early 60s albums, I'm not trying to offend you or anything, but for me, I don't see myself ever going back to most of these albums. But Come Swing Me, pretty good album, actually. I thought it was pretty good. This was actually a blind spot album for me because I didn't know any of the songs on the album.
Okay.
I know quite a bit of Frank Sinatra. I know a couple of his albums, but this was a first timer for me. Day by Day, fantastic opener. He does a version of Sentimental Journey.
Okay.
Of course, if you're a Ringo fan, or if you're a Beatle fan, you know that Ringo does that song. Yeah. Pretty good. American Beauty, Rose, awesome song. On the Sunny Side of the Street, another fantastic song. The Old Black Magic, really nice. Okay. And the last song, I've heard that song before. There's some really great songs in this album, but the songs that don't really hit are boring. I didn't care for it. Yeah. And this album just starts to sound very samey after a while. It's like 30 minutes and like the songs start to blend close to each other after a while. It's not terrible, but again, it's a good album, but it's not an album that I'll be going back to that often.
Yeah. Number 9 for me, I've got Aretha, her debut album. It's called something else on Spotify. It has a longer title, but I think you just call it Aretha, like kind of her self-titled like debut album. So yeah, Aretha Franklin. one of the greatest singers of all time. I have a greatest hits album of hers that's really good as well. But she's starting out. She doesn't have like any of her of course, just starting out here. She didn't have any like her huge hits. To me, the best song on the album was "Over the Rainbow," which I really like that song. Of course, sung by Julie Garland back in Wizard of Oz, one of the best movie songs of all time. And Aretha Franklin is really good. Like she really belts it out, of course, and she has an amazing voice. I had to put her in here because her voice is so freaking good. It just really pops, when you listen to it, just like, wow, she just can really belt it. I don't think there's any, like I said, other than Over the Rainbow, I wasn't like a huge fan of like maybe anything else. I feel like, again, she's kind of part of this soul, jazz kind of music. And I'm not a big fan of the jazzier style. And that's why she's kind of lower on my list. I feel like she's maybe a little too jazzy for my taste at this time. So we'll see where she goes from here. I'm kind of interested in what else she puts out. So it still had to be in here at number 9, but still, it wasn't an album I was a huge fan of, but still love her voice. So yeah, Aretha, number 9.
Cool. Yeah, I tried listening to that album. I'm bored, to be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, I love Aretha Franklin.
Yeah.
Her 1967 album, I Never Loved the Man the Way I Loved You. That's a great album. Has title song, Respect, Down in My Own Tears. There's some heavy hitters on that album, but to me, her albums before that album were, to me, not my cup of tea, to be honest.
She has a gospel sound to her. I'm not as big on the gospel sound either. Yeah, that's kind of where she came from.
Mm-hmm. Okay, speaking of something around that line, my number 8 is going to be an Ike and Tina Turner debut album. That's going to be The Soul of Ike and Tina Turner. Yeah, so yeah, they've been around for a while now. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I mean, of course, their big hit was River Deep, Mountain High, or whatever. That's a fantastic album on its own. I think that's
okay.
I like the album. I mean, I love the album, but the only downside is that it was released in 1968, or it was released when there was a lot better albums. So sadly, you won't be seeing that album on my list. But again, this is a perfect time to have Ike and Tina Turner on here because there's not many great albums.
Right.
Yeah, this is like the first pretty good album, I'd say. I mean, the other two I'd say were okay, but this was pretty gosh darn good. I'm Jealous, great opening song. I Idolize You, You Can't Love Two, A Fool in Love, Sleepless, You're My Baby, The Way You Love Me. I mean, there's some amazing songs on this album. Again, I'm not a fan of the production. And the album starts to kind of blend into each other after a while. I mean, again, it's the early 60s, so it's kind of what to expect at this time. But yeah, there's just other albums I prefer over this one.
Yeah, okay, another good debut. Yeah, Ike and Tina Turner. Yeah, it's funny. Their big hit that I know of is the CCR song. That didn't come till much later. Now that I think about it.
Yeah, and I'm pretty much guaranteeing that's not going to be on either of our lists when we get to 71.
Probably not. And then Tina Turner really became huge like in the 80s. She had like this huge comeback, which is crazy to think. That's like, 20 some years later, she has a huge solo like career. Anyways, but that's cool. All right, number 8 for me, I have album from The Miracles. I have 2 albums from The Miracles on my list. This is the lower one, and it's Cooking with the Miracles. But man, it's so cool. I'm so happy to get the Miracles in here. Smokey Robinson, one of the best Motown singers, one of the best songwriters. Like I said, the Beatles were huge fans of Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, and would either cover their songs or would write songs inspired by them. So a lot of the early songs that John was writing, he was trying to write a Smokey Robinson song. He's trying to go, what kind of song would sound like Smokey Robinson? So that's how a huge influence he had on a lot of the groups coming forward. But again, I really like Smokey Robinson's got a really high tenor voice, of course, very smooth. You got a great, it's a kind of one of those, kind of Motown guy groups have a great overall sound to them. Um, it looks like Broken Hearted was kind of like the hit song off of here. Not super familiar with it. It was a decent song on here. Like I said, there wasn't like a huge song on here that I loved, but overall had everything sounded pretty good. Everybody's got to pay some dues, determination. The only one I love or some decent songs off of here. But I have another Miracles album that I think is actually much better. That's higher on my list, but still, it's cool to get Miracles in here. Finally, I say finally. It's only second year, but I'm like last year it was tough getting albums together. This year is a little bit easier because he had some good stuff like Miracles coming out, so that was great to see. Because I need something to fill me until the Beatles can come along. So I'm like, I need something, and so Miracles is one of those groups that really fill in these early years.
Yeah. Okay. My number 7, it's going to be The King of the Gospel Singers by Little Richard.
I love Richard.
Yeah, Little Richard doing a gospel album.
Okay.
That I forgot where I looked. I forgot where I found this. It was either As It Should Be or on a list site that I was using. Jason knows what list I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I heard the title. I'm like, The King of Gospel Singers, and it's a Little Richard album. I was immediately skeptical. I'm like, I'm not sure if Little Richard could pull it off. I listened to it and I was impressed. Will it be an album I go back to often? No, not even close. But I was impressed from the songs I did like. I respect how different it was. Of course, when you think of Little Richard, you think about how original rockabilly stuff like Tutti Frutti, Long Tall Sally, songs like that. But this is like a slower album, and it's actually pretty good. Joy, 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 pretty good. In Times Like These, he does a version of There Will Be Peace in the Valley. That song has been done to death by anyone who's done gospel or Christian music. Elvis,
yeah.
Johnny Cash. Of course, I still think Johnny Cash does the best version of it, but
Gospel, don't they?
it's like I don't know. It's just something that gospel singers like to sing. Just there's just those songs where it just gets sung a million times. He does a great version of it. My Desire, really good song. This was a good album. Again, you're gonna keep hearing me say this. My big problem is that the songs start to blend together.
Yeah.
Like I can't listen to this in its entirety. It just gets boring and monotonous. But I like the songs, but I probably will never listen to this album in its entirety anytime soon.
Yeah, I didn't listen to that one. That wasn't one on my radar, I guess, or I didn't.
I don't think you would care for it, to be honest. But
I didn't get down to it or whatever. Yeah, it didn't pique my interest, maybe. But yeah, okay, got some Little Richard. All right, what was this? Number 7.
Yes.
All right, number 7 for me is Ricky is 21 by Ricky Nelson. Again, I kind of go to these young heartthrob singers, male singers. Sometimes, they sing a lot of similar stuff. And they have similar style, like this doo-wop kind of crooner style. I don't know how to call it, but definitely a different time. We don't get this kind of music later on. This album, the big hit, there has a couple of big hits. One is Traveling Man, really good song. I really enjoyed that. I'm a traveling man. Yeah, good hit on here. Also, Hello Mary Lou, Goodbye Heart, another big hit for Ricky on here. Another really good song. Some of probably his best songs that I know. I'm not super familiar with Ricky Nelson, but those are two of the big hits that I know from him, and they're on this album, so that's really cool. Also wrote down Everybody But Me was really good on here. So yeah, a couple of pretty good songs. Again, these kind of albums aren't going to be like I said, aren't going to make it my top 10 albums of the year or albums of the decade kind of stuff. But for this year, I enjoy these kind of albums for the most part. A lot of it's cover songs, but you had some pretty nice originals as well. And Rick Nelson, I know, was like a huge star at this point. So, yeah, I got Ricky Nelson in here.
Nice. Well, my number 6. This album barely missed my top 5. These are albums that I'd say are not only really good, but I actually would replay these albums. I will be going back to these albums eventually.
Okay.
Well, I mean, besides my top 3, these next 3 won't be like on constant rotation, but yeah, these next 3 albums are like albums that I'm like, you know what, I'll check this out again. That the first one being Hi, Where Are the Miracles? So got a Miracles album on here. Very impressed by this album. I was like, whoa. I mean, I've always admired Smokey Robinson, great singer. Love his falsetto. First song, Who's Loving You? Love that song. I will say I do prefer the Temptations version, and I do prefer the Jackson 5 version of this song. But nonetheless, great version of the song. All 3 versions deserve respect. You Could Depend on Me. Love that song. I know the Temptations does a cover on the song as well. Really good. Heart Like Mine. Great song. It's an outstanding song. Shop Around. Great. Will You Take Me Back? Because I Love You. Your Love. After All. Way Over There. Which that's another song that Temptations do cover that I do prefer. Money, That's What I Want. This version is actually amazing, unlike the Beatles version. And the Rolling Stones. I think they both did a horrible job. Because, I don't know, I think this song better suits a soul singer, not rock and roll. This is, I don't think Money, That's What I Want is really rock and roll material.
Oh, okay.
It's not exactly the Beatles or the Rolling Stones' fault, but they try to make it like rock and roll, but the song just doesn't fit rock and roll to me. But that's just my opinion. Don't Leave Me, great closing track. This was a fantastic album. This was like, I think it's like a 9 out of 10 album or 9.5. Really impressed with how good this album was.
If you will believe it, Nick, number 6 for me is Hi, Where the Miracles.
Nice.
It fell in the same spot somehow. So that's funny when you're talking about it. I'm like, yeah, I kind of agree with all that. Yeah, I like this a little bit better than the other Cooking with the Miracles. Yeah, Shop Around's a huge hit. It's like the biggest Motown hit at this point. I know I've heard it. Never heard it from the Miracles, I don't think. I heard it from like a girl group, I think made a huge hit out of it. I want to say it's what I'm familiar with more than this version, but yeah, good song there. I wrote down Won't You Take Me Back, Cause I Love You, or some songs I really enjoyed off here. I didn't have enough room to write a lot on my pages, so I just wrote a couple songs on here. Yeah, I wrote down Money. It was funny hearing this version because I'm so used to the Beatles version, the more rocking version. So it was kind of interesting hearing this more, Motown version of it, which was fine. I like both versions fine. I'm not like a huge fan of either version maybe, but gun to my head, I might say the Beatles just because I've heard that version more than this version. So, but that's interesting. You said you really enjoyed the more non-rocking version of it. So I never thought of that. I always thought of it as a rock song because that's the only version I really knew was the rock version. So I'm like, I thought it was a rock song, but yeah, I guess it's a Motown song as well. Interesting enough. So I thought that was interesting. Yeah, hearing their version of it. But yeah, I'd say at this point on, these albums were like 8 out of 10s for me. Like, yeah, they're decent. They're good albums. I say they're albums I would probably buy at some point if I see them. I don't know if I'm rushing to see them or rushing to buy them, but like definitely if I see it out in the store, I'll buy it probably. So yeah, I definitely love to get some Miracles. I don't have any Miracles in my collection. So
I actually do have a Miracles album in my collection. Let me go grab it.
Yeah, I probably need to get like a best of or something at some point. I like getting a lot of these best of albums a lot of times, these kind of groups that I'm not as familiar with. But yeah.
Um, I'll go find it when you talk about your number five. But my number five is gonna be Rick is 21.
Oh,
Yeah,
Ricky's 21.
I actually, I guess I slightly liked it more than you. I guess I
Yeah.
thought it was a really good album. I first time I've ever heard Ricky Nelson uh was from Pulp Fiction when they played Lonesome Town, which that song is amazing.
Oh, yeah. That's a good song too. Lonesome Town. Yeah.
Uh, I mean, I'm not sure if that album will make my top 10 list, the album that's on, but I don't even think it was even in the 60s. But um, this album, though, again, another 9 out of 10 album. My One Desire, great song. That Warm Summer Night, amazing. Uh, Traveling Man, I agree. That's an awesome song, Traveling Man. Lucky Star, Hello Mary Lou, Goodbye Heart. Love that song. Much more than the CCR version, which they do nothing with.
Yeah. Oh, is that on the Bad album?
That's on the Mardi Gras album.
That's right. Oh my.
Yeah, we're talking about a good album this song's on.
Yeah. Much better album.
Mhm. Yeah, this was a great album. 27 minutes, so even when the songs do kind of start sounding samey, at least it wasn't as long. Yeah, this was a great album. I was thoroughly impressed.
Well, that's cool. We got Ricky 21 in our list and Highway the Miracle so far we've agreed on.
Yeah.
uh, I think we have a couple more we're going to agree on here as well. Um, all right, so this is number 5. All right, what do we got here? Number 5 for me is Please Mr. Postman by the Marvelettes. Like I said, this is kind of their debut album. Another great Motown grill group that forms at this time. Uh, I kind of do really enjoy these girl groups at this time. These Motown. I'm excited to get to the Supremes once they start making their albums here. And um, like I said, I already talked about the Shirelles last year, and was one of my favorite albums. And Shirelles is one of my favorite groups as well. But yeah, Please Mr. Postman. Obviously, that's the huge hit off here. It's probably their biggest hit, the Marvelettes. Yeah, great version of it. I love the Beatles version. Beatles is a great cover version of it as well on With the Beatles that I like probably just as much as this. What is that going to? Oh, yeah. That's an album I'll see every once in a while, and I think about buying it, but I haven't bought it.
Yeah, it's two big hits on it. The tracks on my Cheers and Ooh Baby Baby.
Yeah, it's a good song. Yeah, definitely. Uh, but yeah, you also have I Want a Guy, So Long Baby, I Know How It Feels, or some songs I really enjoyed. Overall, I enjoy their overall sound. Lead singer belted out sometimes pretty good on here. And yeah, overall, good girl group sound overall. So anytime one of these girl groups are on here, they're probably, like, until we get to the British Invasion, these are always going to be my top 10, probably, because I do enjoy these guy groups and these girl group Motown uh, type groups at this point anyway. So yeah, so Please Mr. Postman, number 5 for me.
Cool. Well, barely missing my top three. The Amazing James Brown by James Brown.
Yeah.
Think he barely missed my list last year. He made my list this year. So I another really good album. I like his version of I Don't Mind, which The Who would cover for their My Generation album. The last album he did in 1960 was Please, 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 which The Who also covered. So, yeah, The Who really liked James Brown.
Yeah, I guess so.
Just You and Me, Darling, great song. The Bells, Dancing Little Thing, So Long, You Don't Have to Go. But yeah, I think James Brown, phenomenal voice, really another great artist with the great vocals. But yeah, this was a fantastic album. Again, I would be going back to this album. Probably not anytime soon, but this is an album that I would probably either get or revisit.
Yeah, I did listen to that album. I didn't quite make it to my top 10. His first album, or the album before, made it into my top 10 last 1960. But that's mostly because I was struggling to I was struggling to put albums on my top 10. I think, again, this year, I think the albums are yeah, a little bit better. I'm enjoying these albums a lot more than 1960. So James Brown, he has a great voice. The horn section's great. I'm not as big a fan of the style of songs that he sings, but I give a lot of credit for how good of a singer he is on those albums. So yeah. Um, all right, number 4 for me is another girl group, and that is the Shirelles, and their second album here, "Sing to Trumpets and Strings." I have here. So yeah, another girl group. Like I said, Marvelettes and the Shirelles both making my top 10, and Shirelles was in my top 5 last year as well, their debut album. So really love their overall sound. Of course, one of the big groups here. Their big hit song here is "Mama Said." "Mama Said," great song. Really, really like this one. Definitely one of their best songs. Outside that, not a lot of like huge hits here, but overall a lot of good stuff. I'll do the same thing too, and "I Don't Want to Cry" were some songs I was able to write in my margins that were songs I enjoyed. But overall, again, really enjoyed the Shirelles, so they're here at number 4.
I'm glad you got the Shirelles. Glad you're giving them the representation. I thought their albums are okay, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
My number 3, another Etta James album. She was she was pretty high up on my list last year, and she's pretty high up on this year. Second time around. Yeah, Etta James. I mean, if there's 2 albums that I was like really happy to discover going through this journey with Jason, it's these 2 albums. Etta James is not to be messed around with. Her vocals are, oh man, she really belts it out. I mean, I don't know why not many people recognize her nowadays. Everyone thinks about the Aretha Franklins, the Diana Rosses. They talk about they talk about Tina Turner. They talk about them and Whitney Houston, but they never talk about Etta James, which I don't get. I think Etta James, fantastic vocalist. Again, I don't think this album is as good as the first album, but to be fair, that first album is a masterpiece, so it's pretty hard to compare to that album. But there are some amazing songs. "Don't Cry Baby," which is my favorite song on the album. "Fool That I Am," another awesome song. "7 Day Fool," "Dream," "I'll Dry My Tears," "Don't Get Around Much Anymore." Outstanding songs. I think this is a amazing album. If you're not into, but if you've never heard Etta James before, go check her out. She's a force to be reckoned with.
I agree so much. Yeah, and I'll be talking about here pretty soon. Yeah, I really like Etta James. Number 3 for me is "Hold On." It's D. Clark by D. Clark. I'm not real familiar with D. Clark. I've heard that name before, and but this is, I thought, yeah, overall really again one of these, I think young heartthrob crooner guys, doo-wop singers, and soul, a little bit soul as well. Yeah, I don't know. I do like these type of singers in these early '60s, and his just had a lot of. I don't know how many of these are like originals or covers, but I'm guessing a lot of covers. But they are really good cover songs, I think, of these older hits. And yeah, it's just one where I was like, man, I was kind of enjoying most of the songs here. "Hold On" is kind of the big hit on this album. Of course, that's why it's called "Hold On." It's D. Clark, which I do like that play on words, how they use the hit song. Like we were just talking about the Association's debut album just a couple days ago, whatever, with the "Along Comes Association" is a fun play on words on their hit song. So I like that. He has a cover of Cupid, which is really good. Of course, I really love the Sam Cooke. Sam Cooke, it's probably my favorite Sam Cooke song, Cupid. I love that song. So this is a cool uh, kind of a cover of it. Also, Raindrops is really good on this album. I really enjoyed Raindrops. And besides that, just a lot of good, solid covers and so forth on this album. So yeah, I just kind of found myself going, yeah, I just had overall enjoyment of this album. Like I was kind of surprised. I wasn't expecting much out of it, to be honest. And I came away just like going, man, I really kind of enjoyed everything on here. So it was very consistent throughout. So it made it to my top three. At number three.
Nice. I thought that was a pretty good album.
Okay.
My number two. I mean, when I was going through these albums, this album was originally going to be number one, but then another album came along and dropped this to number two. Number two, though, Run Around 2 by Dio. If you're into doo-wop music, this album is for you. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of doo-wop music. It's, again, kind of like one of those things where the songs start to sound samey and all that, but this album is a big exception to that. I think this is a perfect album, 10 out of 10. Opens up with the massive hit, Run Around 2. Everyone knows that song. Da da ba ba bum 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 ba 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 bum bum. You know, she's a run around 2. Really great song.
Yeah.
Somebody Nobody Wants, great deep cut. Dream Lover, great song. Life is But a Dream is really good. The Wanderer just manages to be slightly better than the title track. I mean, both songs are amazing, but oh man, The Wanderer, awesome song. Runaway Girl, pretty good. Majestic, awesome song. Little Star, I love. Lonely World, In the Still of the Night. Even his cover of Kansas City is really good. Most of these covers in the early '60s I find to be generic, but even his his covers are pretty good. Take Good Care of My Baby. This was an outstanding album, and I definitely recommend everyone listening to this.
Yeah, I agree. Number two for me is The Second Time Around by Etta James, which you mentioned. I agree. I really enjoyed this album. Just like her first album, At Last, made my number one album in 1960. Her second album was number two now on my list, which this was, again, yeah, my number one and my number two. I kind of had to go back and forth on which one to put number one, but I thought about putting this number one. Ed James almost got back-to-back albums, which I wasn't expecting. I was like, wow, like I didn't expect to like Etta James this much, but I ended up putting her number two on this time around. And yeah, this has been one of the best discoveries of going back to 1960. Is I heard Etta James, really didn't know much about her except for like At Last. I knew that was like a hit song for her, but never really listened to her music before. And then now listened to albums, and I came away going, man, she has such an amazing voice. She really songs sound great just because of how good her voice is. Like, because it's probably not my style of music necessarily. It's more soul music, and I wouldn't say like I'm a big like soul music guy. But when you have this good of a voice, like it definitely it changes everything. You just go, man, I just enjoy hearing her sing because how good her voice is. I like her even better than Aretha Franklin. Aretha Franklin, of course, is just starting out this time, so we'll see where Aretha goes. See if she has some big albums, or if she'll come out with some albums I'll enjoy a lot. I don't know yet. I just know I've heard two of the James albums, and I've enjoyed both of them quite a bit, which I was not expecting at all. So I get why she's renowned for being one of the greatest vocalists. The song I really kind of knew was One for My Baby and One for the Road. I've heard that song before, but I'm not sure from who. But I liked her version, was really good. I don't know if she's original version of it or a cover, but I really do. I think I heard Bette Midler sing the song before. But anyways, I like that song. It's really good. Yeah, I wrote In My Diary. I wrote Fool That I Am. I didn't have a lot of room to write a lot, so I just wrote a couple songs I enjoyed. But most everything was really good because she's just so good of a singer. She knows, she's belts it out. Oh my gosh, when she belts it out, you're like, holy cow! Like, she knows how to belt it. Kind of like Aretha, they both just know how to belt it and make it sound good anyway. So yeah, Ed James, top two again.
That's great. It's great representation. Both of us have.
Yeah.
My number one is an album that Jason mentioned previously. And when I first heard this album, I was like, wow. That was all I had to say. I'm like, whoa. This is like, to me, this is like probably one of the first, like, really great albums. Like, this is like one of the first times where I feel like they actually kind of paid attention to making a good album. I'd say the same with Dio too, but this is like the first really good album. That is Please Mr. Postman by the Marvelettes.
Yeah, I thought so.
So impressed with this album. This was a really, really freaking good. Angel, that's such a great album opener. Like when I first heard, I'm like, is this like a single? Is this something that, is this like one of the singles? Because this is like high quality right here. And no, it's a deep cut. And I Want a Guy, which love that song so much. Please, Mr. Postman. I mean, that song is iconic for great reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So Long Baby, love that song. I Know How It Feels. They do a version of Way Over There. I already talked about the Miracles version. Now I'm talking about their version. I like it better than their version. Happy Days, awesome song. You Don't Want Me to Know More, great song. Whisper, Oh, I Apologize. This is like the first album where the album doesn't feel like it's starting to sound samey. It actually cohesive. It works. The deep cuts actually have meaning behind them. It's not just filler just to fill out the album to put the hit single on. This is a great album. I recommend anyone listening to this. This was love this album so much.
Awesome.
Yeah, no idea. I'm definitely getting this album once I start collecting again.
That's cool. I didn't realize it was going to be all the way to number one. Of course, until you revealed all your other ones, I knew this was left. So I was like, Marvelettes must be number one because that's the only one you haven't talked about.
Yeah.
I knew you liked the album, but that's cool. Number one. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, for me, number one, you had it number two, Run Around Sue. I thought that was so cool. You had it number two, and I have it number one. So we're both kind of really in sync on this album. It was such an awesome album. I think a lot because it has a lot of great hits on here. A lot of the albums I've listened to has maybe one or two, maybe two at the most. Pretty big songs. This one has a lot of really good songs on it that I've heard before that I really enjoyed. Obviously, Run Around Sue is a big hit. That is such a great song. It's a huge song that was on the radio. I've heard it many times on the radio growing up, listening to 60s music. And his voice is so good. Like I said, he was with the Belmonts before, but I don't know if he had any big hits. But I know, like, here's a solo album, and this is some of his best stuff here. Like I said, because his voice, he has an amazing voice. But yeah, Run Around Soon is so fun. Dream Lover, I really like that song. Like you said, that was another kind of big hit for him. And then The Wanderer, yeah, another huge hit for him. I mean, these are some of his best songs. Like, I don't know if this is his. I wonder if this is his best album because he put a lot of his big hits on here already. We'll see if he has some more albums with great stuff on it. I'll see. But Life Is But a Dream, I love that song too. It's such a nice, smooth, like, yeah, kind of slower song, but man, really love the overall melody. I feel like I heard the song on Cars, the movie Cars. I think did a version of the song in one part, and I really loved it in the movie. So when I heard it, I was like, oh yeah, this song's so good. And then also really like Take Good Care of My Baby, which I'm pretty sure I had that the year before, like for like Bobby V, I think maybe was the original singer for it, and I had his album on my top 10 the year before in 1960. So I love that song. It's probably my favorite Bobby V song. and here we got Dion singing it, and he does a really good version of it as well. So yeah, there's again like I decided to be number one for me just because it had like 5 big hits on it. To me, as far as I can tell, these are 5 songs I've heard before on the radio. So I'm like, man, he's really hitting it on this album. Like I said, love his voice. The songs on here are just really good stuff. Anyway, so yeah, that's why I kind of went. This has to be number one. It's too good. It just has too many good songs on it.
Great choice.
Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, it's kind of cool. We got Run Around Sue. We have in our top 5. Basically, we have Second Time Around in our top 5. We have the Please Mr. Postman in our top 5. So we're kind of agreeing on some of these.
We both have High Were the Miracles at number 6.
Number 6, yeah. So we have High Were the Miracles. So I definitely say those were the big albums for me and you would agree on. Was the Ed James, the Dion, the Marvelettes, and Ricky too. We also like Ricky a lot. Ricky's 21 quite a bit. So there's 4 or 5 of them that we definitely agree on are like the best ones on this year. And like I said, I can't believe these aren't like the big hit sellers and didn't get nominated for Grammys. Like I would prefer these over what got nominated personally, but
Me too.
But I guess they care about Run Around Sue was too poppy maybe for them. I don't know. Wasn't serious enough for them.
That's like objectively, it's the best album of that year. That should have been the big album of that year.
Yeah, no, it's like, forget these nice songs. We're gonna put Judy singing at Carnegie Hall. I don't know. It's like whatever. Nothing against Judy Garland. She's a good singer and all, but it's just like she was big in the 40s. She's like this is 60s. Come on, let's get with the times.
Mm-hmm.
Change for goodness sakes. But anyways. But yeah, so that's really cool. We had some similarities there, so we're on the same page so far. But yeah, that's our top 10 albums for 1961. I think pretty good list overall. Like I said, I think an improvement from last year. So I'm looking forward to 1962, hopefully being another improvement. I think every year, hopefully, is an improvement. And then at some point, it'll start stagnating, I guess, where we're just having one great year after another. And it'll be interesting at the end of the decade to kind of look back at what were the best years, maybe, of music, and where would we put these?
I'd say 62 is the first really good year in music. My entire top 10, I'd say, is really good albums for me.
Yeah, you've already looked at 1962 already, haven't you? Yeah. Yeah. So I'm saying I think I've done a couple albums, maybe I didn't. I think I did somewhere. Maybe I didn't. I don't know. I think I started on the list. We'll see. Anyways, yeah, be fun to see what comes up next. Besides that, thanks to everybody, Scott and
The Thin White Duke.
Thin White Duke. I don't know if I've heard of that name before. That was really cool. I'm glad to get new people in the chats. Really appreciate the chats. Appreciate any comments. If you have any, what's your favorite album, 1961, or what album did we miss? If you have any, I would love to hear them. Love to see where we missed it or where we agree on our.
Might be those big old timers that are like, where's those big albums that I grew up on? Like the albums that made like the top 10 or whatever. Maybe.
But I think it's a pretty good list. I think we both had a good list here. We got good representation, some big names. So. I agree. I like all that. So, I guess I have nothing more to add. Do you have anything more to add to it, or? Not really. I'm just really excited to continue on this series because, this was a good year of music, but next year is going to be a really good year of music because Beach Boys, Bob Dylan, Johnny Cash releases a great album that year. It's gonna. Four Seasons debut, so Drifters starts to get into play. So yeah, we're getting into some great stuff. Oh, I was gonna say, was any other albums that you didn't have in your top 10 that you would? Again, I just listened to enough albums to make a top 10. To be honest, no. like albums I kind of had in contention. I had "Runaway" by Del Shannon. Um, the title song's great, but the rest of the album wasn't that great, so it didn't make it in there. But I wrote down "Dance to a Chord to Three" by Gary U.S. Bonds. Uh, Again, it was not a great album, but good voice. Enjoyed some of his singing. I have "Life Is Just a Bowl of Cherries" by the Platters. Again, it wasn't great, but I know the Platters have some good stuff, but unfortunately, I haven't heard anything. Because they had some albums in 1960 that I wasn't a fan of either. So I was like, maybe there's these 50 groups like the Platters, the Coasters that they didn't make my list in the 60s. I don't know if their best stuff might have been the 50s, but anyways. So those are other albums I had written down that were contention maybe to get into my top 10, but didn't quite get there anyway. So that's all I have to mention. So besides that, thanks for watching, and see you next time in 1962. So for me, Nick, so long. Have a good week.